Hello and welcome to another episode of OPE. I am Iowa Joe. This is another episode of our off-season off topic. I can't even talk tonight. This week I am joined by my guest. I was going to say special, but I don't know if I highly regard you enough to call you special. Maybe like short bus special, but my guest, Yankee Marshall. Yanks, thanks for joining me.
Well, I don't want to be here. I'm being blackmailed. Just so everybody knows, I'm being blackmailed.
Well, you don't want the yeah, I know. I got pictures.
hmm Oh, the pictures. I don't care about the pictures. I knew sooner or later people are going to find those. It's the old VHS tapes that I'm more worried about.
But Yank, we're here to do a little bit of talking about wrestling. I'm a bit of a fan. I know you're a bit of a fan. I don't follow it as closely as I used to. I'm pretty sure you said you don't really follow it as close as you used to either. But
I, I,
it's still.
I try. I've tried. I tried to like AEW when AEW came around. I tried for a couple of years to like them. It was almost impossible to like them. Uh, and WWE, I don't know most of the people that are there now. And now that it's run by TKO or whatever it is, it's just a different feel. But I sometimes try to get back into it, but I just really haven't had much time lately. I prefer old stuff. I like to watch the podcast with like Jim Cornette and Stevie Richards and all this other stuff where we talk more about stuff that used to happen in wrestling and then a little bit of the new stuff. But I like the
Yeah,
old
I feel kind of the same way. I try to watch AEW now and again just because, for the most part, they have wrestlers on there that I view as pretty solid wrestlers.
a
You know,
couple.
yeah, a couple of them, and I think we both can agree that certain EVPs of the company that we can't stand, uh, Young Bucks, can't really, not really big
Buckaroo,
fans. Yeah, those guys,
Nikki
I'm
and
not
Maddie.
something like that, and I'm not a big fan. I don't mind Kenny Omega. I don't see him as like a big superstar like all these other people do, but I do see him as a solid in-ring competitor.
I see him as someone who could be a good wrestler if he had the right mindset, but he doesn't have the right mindset.
And then there's guys over there that have good gimmicks that I kind of do like. Uh, but other than that, the storylines are just, you can tell it's similar to the WCW days where they had the guy that really loved wrestling just pumping tons of money
Mm,
into it, even though he didn't know what he was doing with it.
yeah.
And so,
Or
and
even
then
worse. It's even worse because he was a fan of indie wrestling, and indie wrestling sucks.
yeah, but everybody's got to make their bones somewhere. I view indie wrestling similar to the old territory days where, that's where these guys would start out, and then the big time, that you'd have that one company in each territory that was the big dog, and all these little guys would want to get to that big company like WCCW and well, it was WWWF, and then what was Georgia?
Championship wrestling.
Yeah, you had those places that was the big times for these guys to go to, but you still had the smaller groups that
You had
had to
Georgia,
go.
you had Memphis, you had Texas, you had, there were all kinds of, Portland was a hot spot at one point in time. Roddy Piper tried to start Portland back up. Of course, so did Matt Bourne and them, but just never took back off again. It just wasn't the time for it. But yeah, the territory days I liked better. I'm much more a fan of Georgia Championship Wrestling and NWA and all those groups than I Memphis Championship. That was more my time frame of wrestling when I was really into it, like Mr. Wrestling #2 and Tommy Rich and Dusty Rhodes and Ric Flair and all those guys. Those were Jimmy Boogie Woogie Man and all that stuff. Those were Jimmy Valiant and those were all my favorites back in the day.
The only thing about Ric Flair, and don't get me wrong, I was a bit of a fan, but I because I watched more of WCW. growing up, we didn't have USA in the house. We only had TBS, so we could only watch WCW. But the thing about about Ric Flair, it, when he started towards his second or third retirement or whatever you want to
Mhm.
decide on it, he wasn't made for modern style wrestling. The stuff that is on TV all the time, because he was having the same matches every match, and it worked better for him when he was doing house shows and traveling the circuit and stuff like that, because he was hitting different audiences. But
Mhm.
when you're in front of TV and you got the same audiences tuning in and week out, and you're having the same match, and you can pretty well know what his calls were. I'm going to chop you. I'm going to knee chop you. I'm going to go up to the top. You're going to
Mhm.
throw me off. I'm not going to hit it. Uh, Woo woo, dance dance. Then we're going to go home and figure for it.
Yeah. Well, I mean, he was from the old school where the vast majority of your matches were seen by only a or an auditorium full of people, and those people didn't have any contact with the next auditorium with the people you're going to see. So they would do the same match in like 10 different auditoriums over the course of 2 weeks, and nobody knew any better because they thought they were the only ones that saw it. And then when they talk about it on TV, they always made sure for continuity. Like that was one of the reasons why you always wore the same trunks. You always did this because when they would say, "Oh, last week, Ric Flair and Steamboat did this," they would show you one clip from it that they recorded like in Birmingham, but everybody who saw it in Birmingham, Huntsville, Tennessee, everywhere else thought, "Oh, I was there. I saw that." So they
Yeah,
tried not to be too specific with things. So
I actually watched the other night at work. I it came across my YouTube feed, and it was War Games. Was it 91? And it had Stunning Steve Austin, Rick, no, not Rick Flair, Arn Anderson. It was the Paulie Dangerously's group. So there was Stunning Steve, Rick Rude, Arn Anderson. Uh, there's one that that's just not coming to mind. But halfway into the match, Austin's busted open. Uh, uh, then on the other side, um, you had Dustin Rhodes and Sting and Barry Windham, and there was a couple other guys, and it was like halfway into the match, they were almost all of them were busted open, and and you saw Rick Rude try to take apart the ending of the match was he was taking apart the
turnbuckle,
corner, yeah, the
turnbuckle.
turnbuckle, and he was going to hit the guy with the steel rod, and the good guy ducked, and he nailed the other guy, and the other guy got rolled up 1, 2, 3, and it just it's amazing how easy it was to be a wrestling fan back there, and the mystique of it all. That
Well, and there was two different worlds of it too. If you were someone who just watched, Georgia Championship Wrestling on WTBS, you saw a very clean, sanitized, good guy versus bad guy wrestling matches. You didn't see blood, you didn't see anything like that. But if you followed it like you actually saw it live, or you better even yet, you followed the magazines, it was all blood. It was just bloody, bloody, bloody back then. And people who didn't read the magazines and see stuff live, they had a way different experience in the stuff they saw, unless you did a pay per view or something. But if you just watched the studio feeds, well, those were sponsored by local Chevy dealers, and they had to meet the standards of the local TV station. They couldn't do blood and stuff like that. So it was two totally different worlds of wrestling back then.
it was, and the other thing that I really liked was the old style war games had the roof on top of it, so it was
Mm-hmm.
similar to a two ring Hell in the Cell. Whereas now, when NXT tries to do the war games, they don't have the ceiling to it, so it's just two open cages. So I wonder if
I think they don't want anybody repeating the Mick Foley stuff and getting themselves killed.
Well, I also got to wondering if it was a little bit of the Arn Anderson thing, because Arn Anderson's career was shortened because of the Hell in a Cell, because he took that bump off the top of the ceiling. I think it
Mhm.
was against the Outsiders, Nash and Hall, and he went up for a power bomb and smacked his head across the top of it.
Mhm.
And so I wonder if they're wanting to limit that a little bit.
Well, I'm sure it's a lot of the stuff. It's liability. And if you put that top on there now with the guys now who are glorified acrobats, they'd be trying to, like, I'm going to one up Mick Foley, and they
Yeah.
would end up dead, and that would be a black eye on the industry. So just take away the temptation, I think.
Well, and the one that I watched, the rewatch the other night, the War Games the other night, they had uh, Alundra Blaze, or she was going by Medusa in WCW, climbed up to the top, and then Sting chased her up to the top, and you could tell it was not sturdy at all because it was buckling and
Mhm.
everything else. So it's just, yeah, it's easier to do
Well, it's
all
like
that.
when Undertaker and Mick Foley were doing theirs on the top of the cage. They were like, every step they would take, they would hear ping, 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 because the zip ties that were holding the cage together were breaking as they were stepping.
Do you think, and I know they've tried to do it with some of these other guys, but do you think they could have a character similar to Taker or Mankind in today's wrestling?
Mm, they could, I guess. Whether they would have the gumption and the skills to get over, I don't think so. But because both Mankind and Undertaker were pretty much a once in a lifetime kind of thing. Mick Foley's definitely a once in a lifetime kind of guy. Uh, Mark Callis is obviously a once in a lifetime kind of guy. I mean, how many 6'10" guys who can really pull their character off, that can still move and do the things he did? And then how many people like Mick Foley can, fall 2 stories onto a table and get back up and fight? So today it's just not the same thing. So selling the story would be different, because nowadays people, everybody's too keyed in on what's going on, and they know it's a character and everything. Back in the day, it wasn't so much. I mean, people believed in all this stuff. Now, though, you can still sell it as in, like, hey, this guy's got a very cool character, and we like it if they could pull it off. But I think most of them nowadays can't pull it off. We got a bunch of, I mean, I hate when I watch wrestling. One of the things that bothered me watching AEW is when I sat there and I said, when I was in my prime, I could whip pretty much every one of these guys' asses. And right now, even as old as I am, I could whip half their asses, like the guy, like the Young Bucks, and Darby Allin. I'm like, I could beat the shit out of these guys when I was in my prime. So I don't want that from a wrestler. I want a guy who looks like he's tough. I want a Sid Vicious. I want, a junkyard dog. I want people that can sell their character. I cannot take the Young Bucks as tough, even though when they get in the ring, they choreograph their matches as if they're the Road Warriors. It's not, you can't buy it. You can't suspend disbelief. I'm like, well, you weigh 205 pounds and it ain't muscle. So I don't buy you being able to do these things. Like, stop this guy. Uh, and when you're writing it in a way that isn't believable, it's really hard to get a character over. So I just don't know if they have the people that could do it these days.
Do you think maybe one of the reasons why wrestling isn't the same as before is because of the broken kayfabe? That now you can go online and these guys are palling back and forth and all that stuff. Whereas before kayfabe, you didn't see these guys traveling together. You didn't see
Or
these
they get
guys
fined if
commute
they saw them traveling together.
or fired like
Yeah.
Shiki and Hacksaw.
That's all, Doug. And yeah, well, it wasn't just the traveling together that was the problem with them. It was the traveling together with cocaine and quaaludes and everything else. But kayfabe is something that, you just couldn't possibly maintain full kayfabe in today's society. But even
Right.
when I was a kid, most people were realizing it was scripted. Most people knew this is a show, but they didn't really care. Nowadays, I think they could do the same thing where most people know it's a show. Probably the only people that believed back when I was a kid were the kids. A lot of adults had already figured it out. There were some kids, and it got more so as I got older. Uh, and there are the occasional adults who believed every bit of it. But today, if they didn't allow the performers to just be so blatantly, I'm telling a story, I'm an actor in a ring, that kind of ruins the mystique of it. It just kind of blows it out of the water as far as entertainment value, because even with, like you go watch a movie, they're an actor, but you don't all day long hear them saying, "Oh, here, see this part. Me and him were really buddies, and I don't mean this when I'm saying this or doing that." You don't hear that all the time. These performers on like AEW and stuff, they go out of their way to make sure that none of this is real. We're just gymnasts. I don't want to watch gymnasts tell a story.
Yeah, and I think that's why I like the luchador way a little bit better than what they do at AEW, because at least the luchadors make it seem believable with what they're doing.
Mm-hmm.
Because like you said, AEW seems so okay, well, I got to stay here for a minute while everybody around here gathers, and then I'm going to
Mm-hmm.
do this double somersault off the top rope.
All the time.
And yeah, whereas the luchadors like AAA and stuff like that, or even back in the WCW days with the cruiserweights, they just went for it. There
Yeah.
was hardly any thinking with it. They just were up. I did watch when Ray Phoenix's debut for WWE, and I was amazed by him because it was that same way where he was just jumping, and if his guy was there, his guy was there. If he's not, he's
Unfortunately, the guy
taking the hit.
wasn't there very much.
Yeah,
That was one of the reasons Ray Phoenix looks bad when he first came in, because he had to adjust to the slower, more methodical style, and that's just not how he wrestles. He's used to, I go bang bang bang, the guy with me goes bang bang bang, and we try to bang bang into each other 2 out of 3 times. And that's not what the modern American style was. It was slower paced. And that was one of the things I think really killed modern wrestling, is trying to incorporate too much of the luchador and the Japanese style into American wrestling. It's just not good. Used to be, if you're in the ring and you're running across and you bounce off the rope and you come back and they're not in position, well, you don't do the move. You think of something else to do.
yeah.
Nowadays, if you go bounce off and then you kind of slow walk it until they get into position, and then you do the move, because what matters is doing the move, getting the high spot. It didn't matter in telling the story or making it believable. What matters now is getting the high spot, and that makes it so choreographed and so cooperative and just so boring to watch, because as soon as you can sit and watch an AEW match, and based on where the one guy is standing or where people are moving to, you can tell exactly what the next move is going to be, because it
Yep.
takes them so long to get into position, and they won't move on to something else or fill. Will wait until everything is in position, because they have to wait and do the high spot. They can't improvise and do something else, because it would ruin the way they want to present it.
And that's the truth. And I'm kind of curious at how this purchasing of AAA by WWE is going to play out, because are they going to let them continue doing what they do down there, or are they going to try to institute the WWE way?
Well, I hope they don't, because that's not going to work down there. And plus, that's not what the people down there want to see. So I would hope not. But what I would love to see is more. I would like to see. I don't like lucha libre style. It's just too fast, and there are too many misses. Their whole point is, if you give them 10 things a sec, if you give them 10 things every minute, they won't notice that you missed 4 of them.
Yeah.
And that kind of gets on my nerves after a while. But I do wish they would get back to a slower, more improvisational type of wrestling, to where, like not John Cena level of, improvisational, where you can see him literally telling every move of the match before it goes. But,
Where you can hear them.
yeah, if you're coming off the rope and you're going to do a swan dive over the rope and you expect your guy to catch you, but as you're coming, you see he's not in position, his back is to you. Well, then improvise and go under the rope and kick him in the back and knock him into the rail and tell him, you weren't in position, so I had to kick the shit out of you. And then go on from there. Don't be like, no, 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 we got to get that flip. I got to flip over the rope. That's I got to wait for him to get in position. That ruins wrestling in my mind.
Do you also think the overuse of certain moves have ruined them? Like, every match seems to have 6 or 7 super kicks or 7 or 8 DDTs, or, back in the day, those were finishers. They
Yeah.
weren't to be used in every bit of the matches. Do you think that's kind of hurt because now they're having to look to, okay, what can I do now? Because now the DDT, it doesn't have the mystique anymore.
Well,
Now the
it's
super kick doesn't have the
and
mystique
that's a
anymore.
symptom of the problem I was talking about. When the match isn't about, okay, here's the story. We're starting our match with this, and by the end, this is the story. This is the impression we need to give people. That's not what they're doing anymore. They're not worrying about the story or the continuity or anything like that. They're only worried about, we have to get in these 8 high spots. We have to do you do your finisher, I'll do my finisher. We'll kick out of it. Those are all high spots. We'll get pops from the crowd. When instead of telling a story the whole time, they just do high spot, high spot, high spot, and it gets to where none of it matters anymore. It's like when the Young Bucks are kicking out of what's the guy, the big guy who was with the Motors, that he was with Jake Roberts was his manager for a while. He's one of their big AEW.
Oh, yeah, Lance Archer.
Lance Archer. When you got the Young Bucks kicking out of his finisher like 3 times in a match, well then what's the point of that? I mean, now his finisher means nothing. When you're even doing it to each other 4 or 5 times during your match, and you're each getting out every time, you know, it's just stupid. And like I said, it's the substitution of story with high spots. And I don't need to see 15 high spots per match. I would rather see a I don't need a 20-minute match where everybody does 13 Hurricane Ranas and 7 flips over the top rope, and 3 where they cooperate and get their hands under his feet and flip him in the air. I don't need to see that 100 times over 20 minutes. Give me a 7-minute match where 2 guys get in the ring. You think these guys really dislike each other, and they're telling a story about how they're treating, how they dislike each other and what they're going to do to each other. And that was just so much more interesting. I would much rather see 7 minutes of good story with 2 or 3 high spots than I would 20 minutes of high spot, high spot, high spot, high spot. But that's all AEW is. It's not even, there's no story there. When was the last time they followed through on a storyline or even had a storyline?
The only one right now is whatever the Death Riders are doing, and that's even limited in the story. Uh, I guess they've got a little bit of one going on with FTR being heels now, but
Well,
yeah,
FTR
they're
is
still.
the best ones they have, and they should be used a lot better. But instead, they're used as fodder for high spots because they can take it. They can make these other kids' acrobatics look good. So that ends up lessening them, though. They've been ruined in AEW because now instead of being the badass team, they're the guys that they use to go out there and make the acrobats look good because they could make it look decent because they're such good wrestlers. But that ruins their mystique, ruins their gimmick because now they're just the guys that put everybody else over. It's like, what's
What
his
do
name?
you?
How many matches has he won as a single? Every time they put him out there by himself to make one of the high flyers look good, he loses every freaking time.
Yeah. What do you think about like comedy in wrestling? The comedic wrestlers.
Well, there's always been some comedy in wrestling. Uh, uh, it wasn't. You didn't used to be like a skit. Like we're going to do a skit where we're like in a restaurant and we're going to break out into song and dance and do stuff like that. That's ridiculous. But it used to be the comedy was, hey, this guy's an asshole, and he just pulls this prank on the guy you like, and oh my god, the guy you like is mad, and you're mad too because that was a dirty thing to do. It was childish. Blah blah blah. Like hit them in the face with a cake or something, something they set up a prank, a dirty, nasty thing to do to somebody. And that was where the comedy came from. It came organically from childish interactions between the good guy and the bad guy, where the bad guy is just taking advantage of the situation, doing something mean, and it made you mad. But it was funny when it was happening. And it was really funny when you got him back. Like, when Jim Cornette would try something and then the guy would get him. He would try to do something to run away, but they would fuck up and he would grab him by the shirt tail and drag him back. That was funny. It was funny because the bad guy was getting his uppance and he was acting like a fool while it was happening.
Well, I guess my question is more like the comedic wrestlers, like a Danhausen or a Santino Marella or
I don't like
those.
Santino Morella. Don't. I mean, it was okay. Even our truth, he can be funny, and it's fine to have the oddball wrestler who can be funny. Occasionally it's good, but they have to be able to connect with the crowd to the point where the crowd is like, "Oh, this guy he's so funny, and he wants to be a wrestler, and he's just a little bit weird, but he always gets his ass kicked, but we like him." Or he's got to be kind of funny and weird, but he can back it up, and really do some good storylines and stuff like that. If they're just sent out to be a clown to distract the audience between matches, well, I'm not for that at all. And that's unfortunately Santino Morella. I mean, he could back it up in the ring. He was kind of a legitimate tough guy, but the act got a little old after a certain amount of time. They kept pushing it too far and too far. We got some laughs. Let's get more laughs. It's okay to have a funny character who's interesting and funny, tells good jokes, has smart comebacks, acts like a fool in the ring when he's getting the upper hand. That kind of funny's fine. But if all you are is a clown, well, that's a little much. And Danhausen, it's like he's a clown. That's all he is. Uh, I don't mind him. And like I said, he could be used properly. Like if he was the guy who, like, hey, this kid really believes his character and he gets out there and he tries, but who he's one of these days he's going to get killed. You can get a lot of support behind a character like that, where you're like, oh my God, don't let him get hurt. Just don't let him get hurt. But they don't do that. That's not how they do it. That's like they fired every single person that knows anything about writing wrestling and hired a bunch of Hollywood writers who don't know anything. They just want to, I'm going to write a sitcom basically for this wrestler that he's going to act out on stage. And that does not work.
I agree, and in some sense, I mean, I do agree that that maybe overuse can kill some of that stuff. Once in a while, Santino was pretty good with the whole messing up their name and the
Mhm.
broken Italian a little bit there. But I know his most famous spot is when he tried to do Melina's entrance and tried to do the splits and just ended in nothing but him writhing in pain.
Mhm.
Uh, but like with Danhausen, I've found he's more entertaining outside the ring
Mhm. Well,
because
that's more like a manager role or a supporting
yeah,
role, you know. So it's
and I
okay for
know he
managers to be weird because they're just managers. They're there, they're heat magnets, and they're there well, like I said, generate heat, and they're there often to be comedy relief. Uh, 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 Jim Cornette, Bobby Heenan, Jimmy Hart. 3/4 of the time you saw them on screen, they were either doing something illegal or running around like a chicken with their head cut off, trying to get away from the good guy while, almost pissing their pants and all this other stuff. They were there for heat and comedy relief. The wrestlers didn't need to be that funny. But I don't mind when a wrestler is funny. There's some wrestlers, Diesel was very funny. A lot of people forget that before they made him the baby, bubblegum baby star, baby face champion. It was very funny. And then after, when he went like to NWO and everything, he was very funny. His jabs, his time on the mic. I mean, he was incredibly entertaining. The only problem with that, though, is it got to be where even when they were trying to make him a bad guy, the crowd was on his side.
yeah
Because he's so funny and so entertaining, and they had to, you have to work around that. So it's a balancing act.
yeah, and to the point of with Nash that he his comedy even got to the point where he was pissing people off in the back, referencing the where they went out there as the Four Horsemen,
Mm-hmm.
and I guess they went back there and Arn was completely upset with how that was portrayed,
Oh
and
yeah,
it's like it's a joke,
yeah.
but
But was it a good joke? Is the thing. Was it in
yeah,
good taste? Is the thing.
um, so what do you? How do I want to put this? When do you think wrestling was the cream of the crop, the best it was ever going to be?
Well, like I said, I like the territory days, and I like that because there was more. ability to be creative, and you had more things to pull from because you had different territories, and you ran this storyline, let's say in Texas with Terry Funk and everybody, and then crowds got tired of seeing him. He got a little stale there, so they would bring him to Georgia, and then they could run the same thing again. These basically because it was all new to the people there because they didn't see the wrestling from Texas. But they could just modify the story a little bit and use it again. And you had such a variety because you had like these 10, 15, areas where you could pull little bits from and interchange people. And, you had more combinations you can put together that people hadn't seen. Now you see everybody every week, and it gets so old and so boring when you had 15 different territories that each employed 30 wrestlers. Well, that's 450 wrestlers that you have to put together in combinations over years. Whereas now there's two big companies that each employ like 50 guys, and every one of them has worked with every one of them already. So, and you don't see them move from one territory to another to where new audiences seeing their stuff now. It's always everybody seeing their stuff every time they do it, and they've seen them do it 10 times with every other guy on the roster. And when Vince McMahon made it a nationwide thing, he really ruined it. So I think, the rock and wrestling time frame, to get back to the question, that was great. I loved it. But I was at the right age to like it, like Cyndi Lauper, etc. Like the Iron Sheik, Hulk Hogan, all these people. So some people would say that was the golden age of wrestling, the rock and wrestling. That's when it was really going national and everybody was. But I would say I think it was actually better during the Gordon Sully and Georgia Championship Wrestling, Arn Anderson, the Four Horsemen, Ric Flair. That was actually better storytelling and better wrestling. The early era of WWF, just two W's, one F. That was probably the golden age of wrestling, the Hulk Hogan's, Andre the Giant, all that stuff. But to me, and then, of course, the Attitude Era. The Attitude Era was also great. I loved the Attitude Era. But I still think it was better back in the territory days when new people came and went, and storylines, were different, and it was more about the story. What you saw on TV was a lead up to the live show. So, you begged your parent, or you waited for Sunday so you could see or Monday so you could see what happened at the Omni on Saturday. So that was more exciting to me and more interesting. But nowadays, you don't have that. You can't beg your grandparents to take you to the Omni to see, Steamboat and Flair, because most of it's on TV now. They give everything away, so you just watch it on TV. And I find that a lot less exciting. Because when was the last time you sat around and you like, I got to tune in on Sunday night because I got to find out if Junkyard Dog killed, this person Saturday at the Omni.
The only the only time that I have any kind of okay, well, I gotta tune in, and anymore it hasn't been great, was always the Monday after WrestleMania, because the Monday after WrestleMania
Yeah.
was always the marquee. That was the reset of everything.
Mm-hmm.
That was when the new stars came in. That was when returning stars came in, and now it's just kind of uh, just another Monday night.
Yeah, it's just another role.
So
So you do.
and even the pay-per-views are the same way. The pay-per-views, that was another thing I kind of liked about AEW. They did the old pay-per-view style stuff
Mm-hmm.
where it wasn't once a month. It was once every 2, 3, 4 months.
Mm-hmm.
I think they're up to like every 2 months or something like that now. But you know, that's when stuff was supposed to pay off.
You're
Back in
breaking
the
up on
day,
me. I don't know if it's me or you, but
it's probably me. My internet's been acting weird, at least when it's
I
on
think
this.
you're breaking up. I can see you now, but
My internet's been acting weird.
yeah. So I didn't hear all that you just said.
Basically, just what I was saying was, with AEW, the pay per views were a little bit more meaningful. Back in the day, the pay per views were more meaningful because, you had the storylines week to week, and then the pay per views was where everything was supposed to pay off. And
Yeah.
now they're not. The pay per views are just another
Well, they'll
Monday
make
Night
up
Raw.
totally new stuff for the pay-per-view. Like, why are these two people fighting? I mean, what led up to their pay-per-view match? Well, it's just Tony's dream match. Oh, I always wanted to watch Kenny Omega wrestle Danhausen, whatever.
Yeah.
So that was what was on there. And you're like, well, there was no lead up to this. There's no rationale behind this. This is just you making scorecards of your dream matches and working them down, and it doesn't have any story behind it. It's like, why are they mad at each other? Why are they competing? What common goal do they both have that they're trying to get to first? It just doesn't make any sense. There's no story behind it.
And I think WWE's fallen into the rut where they're getting too predictable with stuff.
Yeah. I'll
Uh
tell you what, one of the things that really turned me off on wrestling, and this is something a lot of people love, but when I would tune into Raw and the first thing that hit was The Rock's music, I'd be like, oh, fucking God. Because I knew it was not going to be, he's not going to come out and get in a wrestling match or a fight or anything. It was,
right.
he's going to come out and he was going to do a 20-minute presentation on stage, or in the ring, a 20-minute soliloquy, where he told jokes and stuff. And I'm just like, oh God. I'd be like, oh, well, we don't have to be here for the first 20 minutes of the show. We can go, make something to eat or something, because it just got to where I got tired of monologue after monologue after monologue. It just got old to me.
Well, when he was actually wrestling, it was a lot better. But yeah,
I didn't
now
think it
that
was good
he's
then.
just
I thought it was too much.
well, I mean, there were times that when he was wrestling that at least there was going to be some kind of action at some point.
Mhm. Yeah, but I'm like,
Whereas
5 minutes. Give him 5 minutes on the mic tops, and then have something happen. I don't
whereas
need 15 minutes.
Right. Whereas now it's like you just said, it's just going to be a monologue. It's going to be he's going to throw in this, he's going to throw in that, he's going to. It's like he sits back there with the script saying, "All right, well, I got to touch Rudy Poo and SmackDown, and I got to do this, and then we're going home."
Yeah,
So, but before it was at least okay. He's going to hit this guy at some point. He's going to hit this, but now it's and then with him and the whole WrestleMania thing with Cena and Rhodes, now there's no reason behind it.
yeah. I never
So,
really thought there was a reason for the extent of it, even in the Attitude Era. I mean, I liked the Attitude Era. I loved it, but I didn't need the extent that they just let some people go out and talk. Because it got old. It got same thing with Triple H. I got to a point where I was like, okay, I don't need to hear Triple H talk for 10 minutes. Give them 3 to 5 minutes. That's all you should be able to say everything you need to be able to say in 3 to 5 minutes, and then some consequences. Or come out, talk 3 to 5 minutes, drop the mic and wander off, and now we got to wonder what are the consequences going to be. But after 15 minutes of somebody just talking, I'm like, well, if anybody was going to do anything, they'd have done it by now. I mean,
yeah.
someone could have drove from across town and came in and responded to him. So it got on my nerves.
I think that's the point when they started bringing in the Hollywood writers to write scripts for these guys because that just kind of justified their jobs for Vince McMahon. Um, so yeah, they had to script it at some point. Whereas before that, and I got to say the promos were better back in the day, just because they came off the top. There was no
Mhm.
scripting to it. They
Yeah.
said what they were going to say,
There were
and
some people they had to kind of guide in what they said. Like
right,
Sid, you didn't let Sid go off. You told him what he needed to say, or else it would just be a nonsense jumble. But
Warrior.
Warrior, you just knew you weren't going to get. You were hoping you got something you could use. You pre-taped his interviews because otherwise you were getting nothing. But back in the day, the people had a character and they knew how to play their character. So they knew Roddy Piper knew this is what Rowdy Rod would say. This is how he would react to this situation. Mick Foley knows this is what Mankind would say. This is how he'd react to this situation. Jim Cornette, he knew this is what a heel manager would say. I know how to lead this situation. But nowadays they don't know anything about character. They know about, well, I know how to do a triple axel back somersault, so that's what makes me a wrestler. There's not as much of the knowing how to present a character these days as there used to be, and it kind of ruins it. Another thing that ruins it for me is everything happening backstage, and there's always someone there to watch someone be assaulted. There's always a
Yeah.
camera crew. There's always a mic, and I'm like, in the old days, something would happen in the parking lot, like, oh no, uh, 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 somebody Dustin Rhodes or Dusty Rhodes just went out and slashed Ric Flair's tires, and they'd go out there and you'd see kind of the aftermath and Dusty running away, or you'd see them running out and getting into a fight with him. But nowadays, it's like you would see a little skit of someone going out, I got a knife and I'm going to slash their tires. And I'm like, this is not a sketch show. Why is there somebody following them while they're doing it? And especially when someone's committing assault, like outside the building, jumping someone and beating them with pipes. Why is there nothing being done about this? They're trying to kill someone outside the studio.
Or
Back in
my favorite thing is when they always have the camera set up for the cars coming in because, oh
mm,
my God, who's showing up now? And it's like,
yeah, and you knew to be there and have the camera rolling and the sound guy going and the
yep.
lighting set up just right. And or another thing that bothers me is whenever in WWE, and I don't know whoever came up with this idea, it was so stupid. You would always see them watching a monitor.
Yeah.
But the monitor's over here at an angle, and they're all standing over here at an opposite angle, looking at it kind of sideways. I'm like, who watches a monitor like that? And why are you set up with the TV? So the monitor can be seen by the camera, and you can be seen by the camera, and the mic's in the middle. Who watches a monitor like that?
And then the monitor was usually only like that big.
Yeah. Well, they started getting those big flat screen TVs for them to watch, and they had it off to the side to where you could see what was on the monitor and you could see their faces because they're not even facing the monitor. They're like both facing the camera, and it's just kind of off to the side.
Uh, so I do want to do a little bit, and I know you listen to some of the same podcasts I do. I like listening to Story Time with Dutch
I like
and
Dutchman.
that British kid that does all those when he did shoot interviews with all those guys, they were great. That guy really knows his stuff when it comes to wrestling, but he always does one thing with the name association.
Mm-hmm.
So he'd always throw out the name, and then the person would, say what they thought about that person. So I was going to do a little bit of that with you real quick, and we'll go from there. So the first name that pops in my head is Arn Anderson.
Oh, I loved Arn Anderson. When I was a kid, I hated him. I thought he was, just mean and tough. And he was one of those guys, though. You looked at him and you're like, oh, I hate his guts, but you would I would never say that to his face. So I always liked Arn Anderson. I liked Ole Anderson. Ole Anderson was one of my big guys back in the day. And I was young, and I actually believed, hey, that's Arn's younger brother, or Ole's younger brother, Arn, and they're a tough couple. I liked them as a tag team. I always liked Arn Anderson. He is kind of the epitome of late Georgia Championship Wrestling, the late end of that type of wrestling. That's when he really got big. He was kind of after like the Buzz Sawyers and all those guys. He kind of came in at that time and built his reputation. So I really liked him.
Yeah, and I think he was very uh, underrated because the way that guy could throw a DDT or a spine buster,
Mm-hmm.
that's the
He could
ultimate
work.
spine buster.
He
Yeah.
could work. He could talk. And when he talked, you believed he meant what he said. And he didn't get overly crazy. He just sounded like a man who was pissed off and was going to take care of business. And I always liked Arn Anderson.
Jerry Briscoe.
Jerry Briscoe, to me, I never had a whole lot of interaction with Jerry Briscoe. Different territory when I was a kid. So I never knew him as much of a wrestler as I did as a stooge. I mean, I was aware of him through the magazines and stuff, but Jerry Briscoe was one of those guys, the Briscoes, period. I have
Yeah.
been to their body shop that they own when I was younger. A friend of mine took his car to their body shop to get it fixed. But he never struck me as anyone that was that entertaining or that was as big a deal as he is, because I was like, well, why is he a big deal? He just looks like some guy from The Office to me. He never looked like He never did have like a really flashy gimmick or anything. Even though they're actually got the bloodline to do it, he wasn't like a Wahoo McDaniel or anything like
Yeah.
that. So I always just kind of wondered, like, why is this guy as big a name as he is, and blah blah blah. When I was a kid, because, like I said, I didn't see his territory days, didn't know a lot about him, just knew what I saw in the magazines, and he just seemed kind of bland. It's kind of like Bob Backlund.
Yeah.
I see Bob Backlund, and I'm like, he was the WWE champion. I'm like,
For a long time.
yeah, I'm like, what the fuck was going on when I wasn't watching him? Yeah.
Terry Taylor.
Oh, Terry Taylor. He's got to be the most unlucky man in wrestling, because I mean, when you get stuck with something like, wasn't he the Red Rooster?
Yep.
Yeah. So you get
Cock a
stuck
doo doo
with,
doo.
I'm like, who did he piss off to get stuck with that? But I thought Terry Taylor had the look. He had the skills in the ring. He wasn't the greatest on the mic, but he wasn't like, Sid Vicious stumbling over his words and not making any sense. I thought he had all the skills to be a good wrestler. I just think maybe the time he came along, he might have pissed off some people. And plus, he was another long, blonde haired, big dude that was kind of just part of the pack. It was kind of like he was the modern day Tommy Rich, kind of, like a new, like 2.0. And because of that, I never got too into him, his wrestling or anything. And I mean, I know he does a lot of work behind the scenes these days, so he stayed in wrestling. He's still, agent and all that other stuff. But he just never made a big impression on me because, like I said, I think he just got stuck with a lot of the worst gimmicks you could possibly get, and I think it was not a matter of him not having the skills. It was just wrong look at the wrong time where he blended in too much, and like I said, probably didn't kiss the right asses.
Mr. Wonderful Paul Orndorff.
Oh, he's true classic Paul Orndorff. Uh, Everything from his early stuff up to, was it OVW or Smoky Mountain that, he was doing at the end there. But I mean, he's one of the true wrestling giants as far as I was concerned. He was one of those guys you didn't see on TV every week. He showed up once every month or two, and it was like, oh my God, Paul Orndorff is here. Some people are going to get their asses kicked. He was kind of like, how like back in those days, you didn't see the world champion wrestle on TV. You might see him show up at the studio, make a promo, and then him and his boys would jump somebody in the ring to set up a match later. But you didn't see him wrestle. So when someone like him showed up, it was a special event. And he definitely had the goods. He was one of the strongest people you'd ever see in a ring and could really toss people around and put them where he wanted them. So he didn't look good. He's probably not the greatest intellectual storyteller of history, but I really liked Paul Orndorff, and when he showed up, you knew he was going to kick some ass. So that's what I liked about him.
Do you think how do you think the fight between him and Vader really went down?
I don't know, because Vader's a pretty tough guy too. Uh, 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 but here's the thing I know: when you have two really tough guys fight, whoever gets lucky, it's not like in the movies where you trade 50 blows and then finally
Yeah.
someone gets the right one. It's whoever gets the first hit that actually makes good contact is usually going to win when there's two tough guys fighting. So I probably think, Leon didn't know that this was going to be as severe a fight as it was, and he ended up getting his bell rung. Uh, but it doesn't take anything away from him. He just
No.
got hit by a really tough guy. I've seen guys that were super goddamn fucking tough go down because, the little guy in the bar threw an early punch, got him right on the right spot on the jaw, and this guy who he would have normally picked up and ripped in half whooped his ass. So like I said, I think it was just two really tough guys went at each other, and Leon got the worst of it because because Orndorff went to Leon knowing there was going to be a fight. Because Orndorff was going there I'm going to kick his ass. Leon was doing business and just kind of figured out, oh shit, he's about to kick my ass, and had to try to prevent that. So I think it was just a right place, right time for Orndorff, and not so for Vader.
This is my personal favorite when I was growing up. The Icon Sting.
to me, Sting was a gimmick wrestler with a lot of face paint, with the blonde, spiky hair. I never really followed him into the WWE and all these other things. The days of what's his the Crow Sting. See,
Yeah.
that stuff, I never saw any of that when it was. The only time I saw him is later in like WCW when he was coming down from the ceiling and stuff. And it was
Well,
very
that'd have been the
theatrical.
Crow stuff. Yeah.
Yeah, that was the last end of it. But I hadn't followed his career up until that point. Not like I knew everything he did or anything. To me, he was the guy that he was teamed with Ultimate Warrior at
Yeah.
first, and they were just muscle gym boys that came in with painted faces, and that was kind of new to me at the time. The Road Warriors were an anomaly back in the day. You didn't see big, flashy, muscular men all that much. It was mostly Dick Murdoch's and Jimmy
Yeah.
Valiant's and things like that. Those were the tough guys. And Paul Orndorff was a big muscular guy. Tony Atlas was a big muscular guy. But these big, flashy, face painted tag teams, that was relatively new to me, and that's when what I first knew of him. And my opinion of him probably never went much beyond that. I was never a big Sting fan. When people are like, Sting is the GOAT, I was like, yeah, he's okay. But yeah, I just never jived with Sting all that much.
That, like I said, growing up, we didn't have USA in the house, so it was always TBS with WCW, and I grew up in that time of. I remember Surfer Sting, blonde hair, little rat tail in the back, and
Yellow or red
the
trunks or leggings. He always wore the long pants back in those days.
yeah. But and then I grew up through Crow Sting and all that stuff, and a little bit into the TNA when he was there too. So, and then what they were able to do with him in AEW, even at his age and with his back problems.
Mm-hmm.
You know, I loved it. He threw a hell of a drop kick. I have to
Yeah.
give him that. He got the height. He had a little bit. You could tell he was more of the bodybuilder type because he wasn't the quickest. He wasn't all that, but he still had in my eyes, he still had the ability. So just a couple more here, real quick. Uh, we're gonna do these two back to back because I just got to see what you're gonna say about it. Jim Cornette.
Oh, I love Jim Cornette. He was one of my favorites when I was a kid. I loved his whole Mama Cornette act, and I loved the spoiled rich kid with the racket. I loved seeing him get his ass kicked. Uh, his promos, I don't know of anybody that actually equals his promos, other than maybe like a Bobby Heenan or maybe Jerry Lawler in his prime. But even then, they weren't as sophisticated as his promos. He was the best at really telling a story and making you care about what was going on in the ring and making you think that the bad guy deserved to get hurt. So one of my favorites of all time, always has been.
And of course, I got to throw this one back to back with him, Vince Russo.
I don't know all that much about Vince Russo. I did not like a lot of the stuff he did in WC. When he came to WCW, he ruined WCW. It was awful. I mean, it was just awful, self-aggrandizing bullshit. He should never been on camera. Never. Him and David Arquette should have never been in a ring, much less part of main storylines. Same thing with Eric Bischoff. I'm like, he should have been the guy who came out of there now and then as the commissioner, but should never been in a ring. Should never been like one of the head honchos of a group or anything. But yeah, I don't despise him like Jim Cornette despises him. And it's mostly because I don't know most of his stuff. Back in the day, at the time he was writing for WCW or WWF, I mean, it was decent and I liked some of it, but it started to go off the rails. And then he went to WCW and it went even further off the rails. So I don't think he's that good. I think he just happened to be in the right place at the right time. And I do watch him every great once in a while, which I wouldn't want Jim Cornette to know this, but every great once in a while, I will watch a podcast he's on, but only because Al Snow's there also. And I'll watch it just because it makes me uncomfortable listening to Al Snow talk because I'm like, it sounds like it hurts for you to talk. But I will sometimes watch that, and I always come off with the impression of, well, he's very fond. He's the biggest Vince Russo fan ever. He's the biggest fan of himself ever, which is not an endearing quality. And I also find a lot of the stuff he says to just be stupid.
Yeah.
So I don't really find him as anyone. I would never go to him for his opinion on wrestling. Period. I might go to him and like, what's a good B horror movie to watch? Seems like he might know something about that. But wrestling, I just don't like his take on it,
I can't listen to him talk because every other word is bro,
bro. Yeah, that's
and it's annoying as hell. But I do know one of the reasons why Corny hates him so much is he blames him for Owen Hart's death.
yeah,
So,
he does. Yeah,
um,
and
all right, so I'm gonna.
I don't know if that's actually 100% fair, but he did have, was his idea. And, I kind of say though that it was a bad story, but Sting had come from the rafters. Lots of people have come from rafters before. The problem was, to me, the people that really should be blamed is the WWE decided, instead of getting the right people to do this, we're going to get some local people that really don't know what the fuck they're doing. That's where the blame lies. I blame
Yeah.
Vince McMahon, especially Stephanie McMahon, more than I've blamed the writer who wrote the bit.
So just to add a couple of women in here, just because there are a lot of great women involved in the sport, and I've just finished up all of the last few seasons of uh, Dark Side of the Ring.
Mm-hmm.
So sensational Sherry Martel.
Oh, I love Sherry Martel. Sherry Martel. It would probably be hard for me to say who did I find more enjoyable, Sherry Martel or Luna. But I loved the character she played. Plus, both of them. It wasn't like I hated Miss Elizabeth. Because to me, all she was is like, oh, she's the damsel in distress and all this other stuff. And I'm like, don't come to a wrestling ring if you're the fucking damsel in distress.
Right.
Sherry Martel, she's one of those people that looks like if you crossed her, she'd kick the shit out of you. And she could probably beat most men in a fight. Same thing with Luna. She looked like she was fucking crazy.
Luna scared me.
She'd beat your ass. So I liked Sherry Martel a lot, and I think she should have been a bigger name in the industry. Like maybe not as big as Moolah, but she should be right there next to Moolah as far as the important women of wrestling. Should be
And I
Moolah,
agree.
Mae West, Luna, Sherry Martel.
And I agree with that. I liked Sherry. Uh, the most I got to see of Sherry was when she was with Harlem Heat. So,
Mm-hmm.
I got to see her on the down end of things, but after watching the Dark Side of the Ring of hers, I didn't really know she was an actual wrestler before
Yeah.
being.
And when you see her back in the days of what's his name, Kevin Sullivan, and when he was the booker and
Yeah.
everything, that was different stuff, and she really proved her worth.
All right, so this one is going to be a controversial one in a not really in a way, but what happened around her. Nancy, woman, Nancy. Well, it'd be Benoit, but I can't think of what her other. She was
Uh,
married to.
I honestly don't know that much about her, to be honest. She never really got on my radar. So she was never like one of my favorites or anyone I paid attention to or knew anything. Like she's one of those, I was aware that she had a career, but it wasn't something I followed, or because you don't, just because you watch wrestling doesn't mean you follow every person. There's some people when you're like,
Right.
oh, it's their match, I'm going to the bathroom.
Yeah.
And she was more like that to me. Like, so I can't probably even make a real uh now, if you said someone like Sable, I'd be like, hope she burns in hell. But
Yeah.
someone like
Not a
Woman,
fan.
I just don't really have much of an opinion about her.
I just know from all the stories I've heard about her is she had a tremendous wrestling mind.
Mm-hmm.
That when she would help, like Sandman always talked about how Nancy would help him out with stuff,
And
and
wasn't she married to
Kevin
what?
Sullivan first.
Sullivan? Yeah, before he, yeah,
Yeah,
sure, yeah. So, so that's kind of where I knew her from, was when the Kevin Sullivan more related stuff.
because it was always a conspiracy that Sullivan got revenge on Benoit years after
Mm-hmm.
uh, their mixings. So I'm going to finish out with this. Young Yankee gets into wrestling. What's your gimmick? What's your entrance music? And what's your finisher?
Ooh, well, I was never. I'm not a really big guy. I was like, I'd be like, I if I was young and I got into wrestling, I'd be like 6'1", and maybe at my biggest 180 pounds. In really good shape. So I wouldn't be a big wrestler. I'd have to be something more like a smaller guy, more like a Stevie Richards or something like that. I would definitely want to be a heel. I would want it to be a character to where, to the point where, like what's his name? Kind of like Papa Shango or something like what's his name? The not Sandman. What was the guy? Candyman, or no? What was his name? The one that ate the worms.
Oh, Boogeyman.
Boogeyman. I would want a character like that. And I'd probably, my finishing move would have to be something. Oh, since I'm not real big, it would have to be something, like high impact, like something off the top rope, like a stomp or a Kern Rana or something. Because I'm not big enough to like just take a clothesline to someone and take them out. I'm not Bradshaw or Kevin Nash, so or big enough to be like Hogan and just drop a leg. It would have to be a high impact top rope move, which would probably shorten my career a lot.
You wouldn't even go with like a submission, something that you
No,
could
I
lock
just
in
don't.
on them.
I don't know if I'm big enough to sell a submission on a lot of these guys because
I
there's
don't
a
know,
lot of.
man. Anybody gets somebody in an arm bar as long as they got the strength to hold it down.
Yeah, but with someone my weight, size, and weight, I think a lot of like, could you see me try to put an arm bar on Andre the Giant?
Yeah, but that's kind of
Yeah,
bad. Not a lot of people could have put a arm
yeah.
bar on
Or
Andre the
even
Giant.
could you see me putting an arm bar on uh, Big John Studd or any of those guys? I think I would want something high that I used. I would have to use speed and impact over something like that. I don't think I would be a submission wrestler. Plus, submission wrestling is pretty boring. The days of the claw and the figure four and stuff like that are kind of gone. You don't see a lot of, I think Kurt Angle was the last big submission wrestler that you really got popular. So,
Yeah, kind of. I mean, there's some that have some interesting, uh, like CM Punk uses that. Oh, the shit. What do they call it? The oh, I can't think of it, but it's like he has the arm back up this way, putting torque on
yeah, I
it.
know what
I
you're
can't
talking
think
about.
what it's called.
Yeah, I
Kimura
mean,
lock.
but I'm just not a big submission fan. It was always, to me, it was kind of like a letdown in a match where someone got a submission hold, because to me that was a kind of a cop out ending. I just didn't care for it. And usually submission, when someone would go for a submission hold, usually what you'd see, that gave time for people to come in from like Jim Cornette to run in and hit you with the racket and run back out or something. That's what it was used for more often than not. I just have never been a big fan of submission wrestling. Like if they were going for the claw or something, and it's like, oh, he's got him in the claw, I would always be like, well, I hope someone intervenes because that would make it more interesting. Just never a big submission fan.
And then the final question was, what are you going to use for an entrance music?
Ooh, entrance music. Well, back in my day, entrance music wasn't that big a thing, really. Back when I was big into wrestling, it got to be more big as WWE took over, or WWF and the Freebirds. Well, of course, the Freebirds back in the day. Uh, I don't know. It would have to. I'd want it to be something. It's going since my character would have to be something darker and more mysterious. It would have to be something along those lines. Uh, I've always liked pretty much every bit of music the Undertaker ever had. I always liked,
Yeah.
but I don't know what I would use. I don't know if it would just be a mood music or if an actual song. But I'm trying to think back in the day what would be available. I don't know if I can have an answer for that, to be honest, because there's too many options. And if I say something now, I'll think of something else later. So I don't know what my ring music would be. I'd have to think about it because there's so many good things from the '70s that would have worked great when I was younger and coming in, like in the '80s in wrestling. That the '70s songs would have been perfect for it, but I'd have to think more.
Yeah, if you wanted a darker character, then you'd have like Ozzy and
Mhm.
Maiden and
Yeah, things
Black
like that.
Sabbath and
Even
yeah,
AC/DC or something. But
yeah. But that's all I'm going to have
Hell's
you
Bells
for.
would
We're a
be
little bit,
Hell's Bells would probably be a good one for a dark character or something like that. Even though it's a little bit
yeah,
racier, but
yeah. Especially if you wanted a darker tone. Otherwise, you'd go like Highway to Hell as the obvious
Mhm.
one. But that's a little bit more of an up. beat style
Yeah,
for AC.
it's rocky.
So, but Yankee, we're a little bit over an hour. I don't want to keep you too much longer because you did your live earlier today. I appreciate you coming on. Uh, you can tell people where you're at and where they can find you and all the good stuff you're doing lately.
I don't do
Call it
anything good.
good.
I don't do anything good.
All right. Well, you can find Yankee over on his YouTube anyway. You can find us everywhere you find your social medias, Ohana Packers, wherever you want to look. Yank, like I said, appreciate you coming on and talking wrestling once a year with us or with me. I suppose I'll keep the VHS tapes hidden for another year.
Mhm.
And so, thanks everybody. Go Pack Go and aloha.